Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us on Business Incorporated. I'm Chimeze Obi Iwagwu. On today's show, African ministers and social partners join ILO high-level summit on COVID-19 and the world of work. AFDB, WTO, others seek measures to support trade finance in developing nations. And Kenya's private sector activity rises to 46.6 in June from 36.7 in May. Well, let's get the show started now with the markets. And markets we track here in Africa were in the red territory at intraday, with the South Africa's JSE index shedding the most by 0.13%. Nigeria's main index reversed Thursday's gains, declining 0.02% at intraday. Egypt's EGX30 closed for the week unchanged on Thursday, while Kenya ended Thursday's session positive. Most Gulf bourses closed the week higher on Thursday, with Qatar leading the gains, boosted by market heavyweight Industries Qatar. The Qatar index rose 1.37%, with petrochemical firm Industries Qatar advancing 4.6% and Qatar National Bank, the Gulf's largest lender, gaining 2.6%. Elsewhere, Saudi Arabia's benchmark index added 0.81% as RRG Bank increased 0.7%, while petrochemical maker Saudi Basic Industries closed up 1.3%. In the UAE, the Abu Dhabi index gained 0.62%, buoyed by a 1% rise in the country's largest lender, First Abu Dhabi Bank, while Dubai's main share index edged down 0.14%, hurt by a 1.5% fall in blue chip developer Emma Properties and a 2.2% fall in Damac Properties. And in Europe, stocks were mostly higher on Friday morning following upbeat economic data out of the U.S. and China, but a spike in U.S. coronavirus infections tempered optimism. Let's bring in Chelsea now to tell us more. Hello, Chelsea. Good afternoon. Well, the European indices were mostly higher this Friday, with stocks on track for their largest winning streak since April. But how sustainable is this rebound?
Well, here in Frankfurt, stocks are trying to eke out a gain for today, but they have lost steam throughout the morning. There are really two camps in global markets right now. There's the camp that is looking at the current economic data, the figures, for example, from the United States yesterday showing millions of jobs added, the figures out of China overnight showing the highest service sector activity in a decade. So they're looking at these improving figures and saying, okay, this is good. This is a sign that things are improving and that the economy is back on track. But then you have another camp that's much more worried about the rising number of infections. The U.S. is seeing record increases in coronavirus cases now. We're seeing lockdowns being reimposed throughout the world. So this obviously could have a big impact on the improving economic data that we've seen over the past couple of weeks. So for now, these sides are really battling it out, but there is likely to be another more pressure on economic data ahead if we do continue to see more cases and more measures being taken to contain the spread of the virus again.
And the European Union is working to secure doses of the coronavirus treatment after the U.S. announced it had bought up most of the global supply earlier this week. Will EU nations have enough of this drug?
So a lot of EU nations so far say that they have been able to either purchase these drugs or they've gotten donations from the drugs maker Gilead. And so they have a stockpile right now. They think it's enough. We've heard this from Germany, from the UK, from other countries like Australia. They're saying they're pretty confident that they have enough of this drug right now. But the US has really cordoned the market for the next 3 months. They've bought basically 90% of the drug that Gilead is producing between now and September. So there really isn't any room for countries here in Europe to buy any more at this point. On the one hand, the U.S. is seeing the biggest increase in cases right now. They are really struggling with the shortage of this drug already. We've heard many hospitals say that they need more of it. So it is definitely needed in the United States, but if other countries here in Europe, if other countries around the world do begin to see second waves of infections, this could really pose a problem for hospitals, for public health systems throughout Europe if they're not able to get access to that drug. And we see this happening before the company Gilead expects to start ramping up production later in the fall.
In another development, Deutsche Bank is considering buying parts of the bankrupt fintech firm Wirecard. According to media reports, Wirecard remains embroiled in an accounting scandal and multiple investigations around the world. So why is Germany's biggest lender interested in that deal?
It's certainly raising some eyes here in Germany. Why would you want to buy a company that's so enmeshed in this really big and complicated scandal? But a lot of analysts, a lot of investors say that there could be some benefits for Deutsche Bank, which has faced its own share of scandals in recent years. The company, Deutsche Bank, right now is going through a massive restructuring, one of the biggest in its histories, and they're really focusing on improving and growing their presence in more fintech areas. So they want to be processing more payments. They want to be bigger in that space that Wirecard was big in. So they kind of see this as a chance to buy their way into this area that they were already hoping to expand in. Wirecard is a big payments processor. It processes payments for companies like Visa and MasterCard. It has really valuable licensing agreements with those firms right now. So for Deutsche Bank, it could be a good opportunity for them to start doing more in terms of processing payments. But there are obviously a lot of risks of an acquisition or a deal like this, because we don't really know how deep the fraud at Wirecard went. We don't really know what was real at the company, what businesses, what kind of customers it actually had. So these are obviously big questions, and these are preliminary discussions, but it could be an opportunity for Deutsche Bank if they want to grow more in the fintech space.
All right, thank you very much, Chelsea, for those updates. It's been a great week with you. Have a great weekend. And in the UK, markets are still digesting the PMI numbers out this morning. Let's see how that is playing out with the numbers at intraday. Juliana will talk to us. Hello, Juliana. Good afternoon again. Well, you spoke about the services PMI in the morning. How are the numbers reacting to that data this intraday?
Good afternoon again, Chimmy. Well, it's been a pretty dull day here in the markets in London today. It started off in the red, and the FTSE is very much in the red at intraday. We did have those PMI services data showing a significant increase, actually. It was 29 in May. That's gone up to 47.1 in June, still short of that 50 benchmark number. But nevertheless, it's a huge, significant increase, and we're expecting that to significantly improve in July because, of course, tomorrow is Super Saturday, or the new Independence Day in the UK, where pubs, bars, clubs, well, not clubs, but hairdressers are opening. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has already told people to make sure they take it easy. But just before I stepped in the studio, there was a flash from media saying that pubs in the UK will be open from 6 a.m. So that's going to be interesting. But let's have a look at these numbers at intraday. The all share is down 0.92%. The FTSE 100 is down by 0.81%. And the FTSE 250, the domestic market, that's down by 0.13%. In currencies, the pound is down on the US dollar by 0.10%, down on the euro by 0.03%, and also down on the Japanese yen by 0.11%.
Well, Juliana, it's good to have fun, but with care. Anyway, bank shares were under pressure today. However, the chairman of Royal Bank of Scotland has urged the Bank of England to lift curbs on dividends by the autumn. Shouldn't this cheer shareholders?
Yes, it should, and banks do feel that they've been worse off during this COVID-19 pandemic. Their profitability is really at an all-time low, and that's because borrowing is so cheap. Right when the new Bank of England Governor, Andrew Bailey, came in, he set interest rates at a historic low of 0.01%. And just as COVID-19 took grip across the United Kingdom, the Bank of England did urge banks to stop dividend payouts at least until the end of the year. On top of that, the banks across Britain have loaned about £40 billion in state-backed funding, and they've had to write off many of these loans. In fact, for some of them, about £500 million worth, because they've been told by the Bank of England that some of this debt is bad debt, and a lot of the consumers that have borrowed this money will not be able to pay it back. So we have heard today, as you said, from the chairman of the Royal Bank of Scotland, Howard Davies, and really he was just urging the Bank of England to do a U-turn on dividends and to allow banks to pay out this money to shareholders, because he said at the moment that's probably the only thing that is going to interest investment into banks. So he's said that. We haven't received a comment from the Bank of England and no further comments from the Royal Bank of Scotland.
All right, let's wrap up the week. What has it been like, and what is the outlook for next week?
Well, it's been an interesting week, hasn't it? I believe we will be getting, we'll start to get a taster of what June's GDP was like in April, in what May's was like. In April, GDP fell by 20.4%. So I believe on Friday next week, we should have some GDP data. This week, I've got to say, all of the attention, of course, has been on the UK labour market. During the week, we had Prime Minister Boris Johnson trying to resurge the economy by accelerating a £5 billion infrastructure project. He said rather than saving, he'll be investing, even though there was criticism for that, because the £5 billion does sound a lot when you say it out loud, but really that only equates to 0.05% of GDP. Thousands upon thousands of jobs have been lost. I went out to get a coffee earlier on this morning. You do see, a stark contrast on the high street. Some of the stores are bustling, but many of them have their shutters closed, and we'll be waiting and seeing whether or not next week will bring more redundancies as the government's furlough scheme begins to taper off from next month.
All right, we'll wait and see. In the meantime, thank God it's Friday. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. And stocks in Asia rose on Friday as positive economic data raised optimism over the prospects of an economic recovery from the coronavirus pandemic. Mainland Chinese stocks were among the region's biggest gainers on the day, with the Shanghai Composite surging 2.01%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index was 1.1% higher. In Japan, the Nikkei 225 added 0.72%. South Korea's Kospi advanced 0.8%. And U.S. markets are closed on Friday for the July 4th holiday, but stocks rose on Thursday following a better-than-expected U.S. job data as the economy tries to recover from the coronavirus pandemic. The Dow Jones Industrial Average closed 92.39 points. The Nasdaq Composite hit a record high, and the S&P 500 gained 0.45%. And away from the markets, more than 50 African ministers of labor, along with representatives of workers and employers organizations and international organizations, joined the International Labour Organization's virtual forum to discuss how to address the economic and social impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. ILO Assistant Director General and Regional Director for Africa, Cynthia Samuel Olonjuwon, says building back better means that Africa must fully use the opportunity provided by the pandemic to ensure there is renewed vigor and urgency to address the underlying labor market crisis. She says the summit is a call to make social protection for all a key national development goal, while envisioning the informal economy as a critical asset to create decent jobs and become engines of economic growth and sustainable development. The Africa Regional event was one of 5 regional events held from July the 1st to 2nd and will be followed by 3 days of global discussions from the 7th to the 9th of July. And the African Development Bank, the World Trade Organization, and other financial institutions are collaborating to support trade finance in developing nations in a bid to alleviate the impact of COVID-19 on their economy. In a joint press statement, the institutions say they would prioritize their support to areas in the world where such support is needed most, particularly the poorest countries. With the approval of its $10 billion COVID-19 Rapid Response Facility in April 2020, the African Development Bank is providing up to $1 billion in trade finance liquidity and risk mitigation support to local banks in all 54 eligible African member countries. The statement explains that facilitating trade in medical supplies has also been a significant part of these support packages. All right, well, we'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll go to Egypt and see how they are opening their economy. Do stay with us. Egypt has restarted international flights and reopened major tourist attractions across the country after over 3 months of closure due to the coronavirus. In mid-March, Egypt ordered the closure of airports and historical sites when the government introduced measures to help curb the spread of the virus, including a ban on large public gatherings. Let's watch this.
Egypt threw its doors open to international tourists once again after a 3-month break to curtail the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic in the country. Egypt restarted international flights and reopened major tourist attractions, including the Great Pyramids of Giza on Wednesday.
My name is Maurice. I come from Madagascar. I came here to visit the pyramids. It's a pretty place. This is where we see the symbol of Egypt, and this is why we come here.
Last month, the government announced it will restart tourism to resorts in the coastal cities of South Sinai and the Red Sea and in Marsa Matruh, which lies in the Mediterranean. Egyptian Minister of Antiquities Khalid Al-Anani said that 2 flights had arrived this morning in South Sinai and the Red Sea with tourists from the Ukraine. He also said that the historical sites in Cairo, Luxor and Aswan, as well as in other cities, were reopened.
We have started the reopening of a number of historic sites and museums. We have chosen a small number of the major historical sites and museums. In this stage, they will only be open to Egyptians and foreigners living in Egypt.
Al-Anani told reporters the sites will operate mainly for Egyptians and foreigners residing in Egypt until tourism picks up worldwide.
We opened a number of historic sites in major cities. The largest number of attractions reopened is in Alexandria, since it is a place for people to go on summer vacations.
Egypt's Ministry of Civil Aviation said that 16 flights took off from Cairo International Airport, and while 2 arrival terminals were seen empty on Wednesday morning, a screen showed 4 scheduled flights expected to arrive from Toulouse, Kuwait, Tunis and Amman. Tourism, which accounts for 5% of Egypt's total GDP, was shuttered due to the pandemic.
And joining me now to talk more about how things have played out so far since the reopening of these tourist areas in Egypt is the VOA Channels TV correspondent in Cairo, Edward Yeranian. Hello, Edward. Good afternoon. Well, the Great Pyramids of Giza is now open for tourists. What's the turnout like since the reopening?
Well, Jimmy, I have not actually gone out there myself, but the French press agency report on the reopening said there were dozens of tourists there. Usually, of course, there are hundreds of tourists there, so I guess that's a very low turnout. And clearly, there aren't a lot of foreigners in the country, and I don't think Egyptians would be going to the pyramids in the middle of the summer. So it's probably not very well frequented right now.
Well, there is no doubt that with the summer holiday coming soon, Egypt will receive more visitors. Now, what safety measures have the government put in place to check further spread of the coronavirus, with Egypt already recording about 70,000 cases?
Well, they've done what the World Health Organization has suggested they do in most instances in hotels. They have kept the number of employees down. They've kept them monitored so that they don't actually have the virus and that they don't get get anything in the food. They have the laundries being monitored. They have signs in the elevators saying keep away, do social distancing with arrows. They're spraying to disinfect tourist sites as well as the hotels. You can see them out there doing this at the hotels. I was in the Marriott Hotel earlier today, and you could see them doing it. So, I mean, they're taking measures. Of course, is that going to bring tourists back? I don't know.
Our recent survey carried out by Central Agency for Public Mobilization and Statistics, that's the CAPMAS, shows 73.5% of the citizens have experienced an evident reduction in household income caused by the pandemic. How would you rate the government's response to cushion the effect of this pandemic on the citizens and, of course, businesses?
Well, they're doing what they can with the means at their disposal. Clearly, they've been able to get loans from the World Bank, I guess $5.2 billion. So they've been using funds they're getting from the outside to do things to help people in the tourism sector and other sectors that are being affected by this slowdown. Clearly, a lot of things are out of their control. They can't reopen things where it's dangerous, and that, of course, hurts the employees. They have to limit hours. They have to limit numbers going into places in order to keep them from becoming too saturated and having people spread the virus. So, I mean, they're doing what they can under the circumstances. I would say I'd give them an A for effort, if that's the way you would put it.
All right, with the borders now open for tourists, what is the outlook for the economy in the second half of the year?
The tourism minister was optimistic, but it's his job to be optimistic. So who knows? I mean, it depends on where the evolution of this virus goes. The labor minister, on the other hand, participated in a conference, according to the media, and he sounded rather negative. Of course, a lot of the key indicators in the Egyptian economy have been affected by this virus. The Suez Canal revenues, maritime traffic is down, tourism, which is one of the major sources of revenue, is down, and worker remittances from abroad are down. So a lot of factors hitting the Egyptian economy. But of course, the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, they've been fairly generous with Egypt. They have not with countries like Lebanon. So you can see the difference. The Egyptian currency has not crashed like the Lebanese pound. So, you know, it's difficult, but better than in many other places.
Well, I see a lot of optimism there. Thank you very much, Edward, for your time. Edward Yerenyen is Edward Yerenyen is a VOA Channels TV correspondent in Cairo. And private sector activity in Kenya grew in June thanks to reduced curfew hours and the relaxation of lockdowns in Europe that boosted demand for exports. But the outlook for the months ahead remains gloomy. The market Stanbic Bank Kenya Purchasing Managers Index stood at 46.6 in June, rebounding from May's 36.7, but still below the 50 mark, separating expansion from contraction. The coronavirus pandemic has led to stagnated economic activity, with tourism, horticulture, transport, manufacturing, and small and medium-sized businesses hit hardest. The Finance Ministry expects economic growth to slow to 2.5% this year from 5.4% last year, while the International Monetary Fund is forecasting a 0.3% contraction this year. And that's a wrap on the program for today and, of course, for the week. Thank you for watching. I'm Chimeze Obi Iwagu.